Emphatic victory. The coalition comfortably re-elected as the people have their say. Getting on with business. Premier Mike Baird promises to start work immediately on selling the state's poles and wires. Also tonight, murder in Campsie as a father is found dead in his driveway. The moment police swooped on an armed man in Martin Place. And one hand on the World Cup. The bowlers give Australia the perfect start.
This is 9 News with Deborah Knight.
Good evening. It was a victory that looked almost certain from the start. Mike Baird charming and convincing the people of New South Wales to choose him as Premier. And it's not just here in New South Wales that his re-election was critical for the coalition. Last night's result helping ease the pressure on a far less popular Prime Minister. Nine's political editor Laurie Oakes begins our coverage.
It was a relieved Prime Minister who boarded a VIP jet in Launceston this morning, headed for Lee Kuan Yew's funeral in Singapore. If the New South Wales election had gone badly for the Liberals after the defeat of coalition governments in Victoria and Queensland, Tony Abbott would have been preparing for his own political funeral. But Mike Baird's solid victory gave him a boost instead.
I also want to acknowledge the Prime Minister and his support.
Mr Baird won despite a full-on Labor and union scare campaign against his policy of privatising a large part of the New South Wales electricity distribution system.
We decided to be open with the people of New South Wales.
From the moment counting of votes began last night, the result was never in doubt. Suffering a swing of over 9%, the Liberals lost some of the previously ultra-safe Labor electorates they'd won in a massive landslide 4 years ago. But that still left the Baird government on track to win 53 of the 93 lower house seats, Labor with a probable 34. The Greens look like winning 4 seats, Independents 2. As Labor leader Luke Foley said in his concession speech,
"Today the heartland has returned."
He put the best spin possible on that limited success.
We've gone from a rump in the state parliament to a real opposition.
A damaging row has erupted over former Federal Labor Minister Martin Ferguson attacking Mr Foley's anti-privatisation campaign in Liberal commercials.
And you don't get a bigger rat than Martin Ferguson. I would insist that he be expelled from the Labor Party.
The Baird victory will be used to put a bit of steel into the Abbott government at a time when the Prime Minister's leadership insecurity has caused it to go a bit wobbly on tough budget reform measures.
I think what the take-out message is, people are ready for reform as long as it's explained to them.
But a sobering aspect for the PM is that Mr Baird's success as a reform salesman is attributed in large part to his likeable personality and the popularity that gives him with voters.
I don't think Tony would pretend he's popular.
With this election out of the way, the May federal budget and how it's sold looms as Mr Abbott's next hurdle. Laurie Oakes, 9 News.
He was elected by his party a year ago, but last night was the first time the people of New South Wales voted in Mike Baird as Premier. It was an emphatic victory, which he promises will change our city and state forever.
It was the Premier's lap of honour. Heading to Manly for handshakes, waves and kisses. After a gruelling campaign, Mike Baird and his wife Karen simply soaked it all up.
I'm very humbled by what has been given to us last night, and it's time to get on with it.
It was a decisive victory, but never a done deal.
I love this state.
What are you thinking when you're seeing the numbers coming up? What was going through your head?
Well, it's hard to describe. I mean, certainly you're watching it, but you almost feel like you're watching a movie rather than realising you're right in the middle of it. And certainly seeing those results came through as we got closer and closer, I thought we could well get there. And I have to say that I was then filled with this amazing sense of excitement.
The Premier has always said a win is a mandate, so work will start immediately on selling the state's electricity assets. Mike Baird staked his political future on a controversial plan. Now his government needs to deliver $20 billion worth of infrastructure, including the WestConnex road project linking the M4 and M5, a second harbour road crossing, the Western Harbour Tunnel. There's also the Sydney Rapid Transit, a second rail tunnel under the harbour, more money for health, including almost $1 billion to transform Westmead Hospital, $1 billion extra dollars for education, including a multi-storey high school in Parramatta, and $200 million for our Opera House. Opposition leader Luke Foley took his winners out for Sunday brunch this morning.
Did I get the fresh start breakfast?
Labor won 6 seats back in the West: Londonderry, Macquarie Fields, Granville, Campbelltown, Prospect and the Blue Mountains.
I want to thank the people of Western Sydney, the Hunter and the Central Coast for returning to Labor in such large numbers.
Hinting there may be a possible policy flip on blocking the poles and wires sale.
After an election, all policies are up for review.
The Greens were beaming 2 Sydney MPs in the lower house, 1 and possibly 2 more on the north coast. Jamie Parker held on in Balmain, Jenny Leong, the first Green in the new seat of Newtown.
If any of the people in Newtown have anything to do with it, we won't see the WestConnex motorway happening.
A clear win for the coalition. The make-up of the upper house may muddy the waters. Lizzie Pearl, 9 News.
And Laurie Oakes and Lizzie Pearl join us live now. Laurie, to you first. Tony Abbott and his government, they did their best not to rock the boat during this campaign. What can we expect now that it's over?
Well, they certainly did go out of their way not to rock the boat in the lead up to yesterday's election. Before the Victorian election last November, there were a number of gaffes at federal level, a number of mistakes that contributed to the ousting of a one-term state government. And the Victorian Liberals were furious, as you'd expect. Ditto before the Queensland election in January. The abrasive Campbell Newman didn't help himself a lot, but actions by Tony Abbott and the Feds again contributed to the defeat. For example, the nonsense of the Prince Philip knighthood just before the poll. You know, that didn't amuse anybody in Queensland. So the New South Wales Liberals made it clear that they wouldn't tolerate any repetition of that. Mr Abbott and his colleagues had to be on their best behaviour. His survival as Prime Minister, in fact, depended on it. He's been very careful to give Mr Baird a clear run. A discussion paper on tax, for example, was held back in case that could be used to frighten New South Wales voters. There's no longer the need for such restraint anymore, of course, so the tax paper's coming out tomorrow, and that'll spark a debate on possible changes to the tax system. Some of them might frighten the horses. Budget ideas, controversial budget ideas, are now up for discussion again now that the Baird government's back. Mr Abbott can stop acting as though he's treading on eggshells now, because it's only his government that'll suffer if he makes a blue. Deb.
Always good to get your insight, Laurie. Thank you. Lizzie Pearl is at State Parliament tonight. Lizzie, what's the first thing on the Premier's agenda?
Well, Deb, it's been a very long campaign, so Mike Baird is very keen to be seen to be getting back to business. So it will be back to work for all MPs bright and early tomorrow morning. The first thing he'll do as Premier is to reshuffle his cabinet, so we'll see the new Baird team before the end of the week. One of the possible bigger changes is the move of the high-performing Gladys Berejiklian from the transport portfolio into Treasury. Of course, the next big thing we'll see is getting that poles and wires sale legislation before the Parliament. Mike Baird has again today urged the opposition Luke Foley to get out of the way of that legislation, to respect the mandate of the electorate. But certainly things in the bear pit here will be looking a lot more even after last night's result when Parliament does resume. Deb.
Indeed. Lizzie, thank you.